Okie dokie. So let's get started. So today's class, we're going to be looking at connected speech, which is a really important part of pronunciation. Quick definition of connected speech would be when we're speaking, how are the sounds connected to each other? The sounds of each word and also the sounds of, well, the sounds that are contained inside each word. But really, the trick is related to how each word is connected to the next one. And this is something that's very particular about English. Not many other languages share this particular thing. So as I always say, I go through this in the book quite a few times, and I speak to you guys about it quite regularly, that the main purpose of teaching and learning pronunciation or aspects of pronunciation isn't so much so that you can pronounce correctly. It's really so that you can understand native speakers when they're speaking, because, you know, conversation is one, you speaking, and then B, the other person speaking. So unless you have really terrible pronunciation, people are going to understand you. Now, there are tricks, as I say, about emphasizing your consonants and speaking more slowly that can increase the probability that somebody's going to understand everything that you say. But the most important part is when you're speaking to a native speaker, being able to understand what they're saying when you're speaking to them. Otherwise, you lose half of the conversation and then you're lost. Because if you don't understand the person that you're speaking to, you can't carry on the conversation. So really the key aspect of pronunciation, in my opinion, isn't pronouncing correctly. It's understanding native speakers when they speak. So connected speech is one of the most important aspects of pronunciation in my opinion, because there's some peculiarities about how English is structured, basically, in terms of the sounds. So one thing that's key to understand is that written words have gaps between them and spoken words have no gaps. This is really important. So, you know, before writing had been invented, people's only perception of language was sound. That's all language was. But in the modern world, we've got the luxury of being able to read and write, which means that we kind of put a bit too much priority on individual words and not how individual words are pronounced when they're put together. Another reason for this is that typically when non-native speakers start learning English in this case, or another language, but English in this case, the first contact with it is in the written form. So you see lots of these words written, and your brain tries to pronounce each word separately, which is normal because you're an absolute beginner. You've got no concept of English. So your only reference is these words that are written. And when they're written, you can see a clear gap between these words because that's how we write in pretty much all language. Yeah, all languages, I'm going to say. Each word is written separately when it's printed, when it's written down. But when we speak, that's not the case. So this is a big mistake because subconsciously, your brain is going to prioritize each individual word in a sentence and try to pronounce them separately. The problem with that is that English, that's not how English is spoken, because when English is spoken, there are no gaps between the words. Where are there audible gaps? So forget written English now, forget written language, just looking at the sound, just considering the sound of the language. Well, just listen to the sounds that I'm producing now. It's basically just one continuous sound. It's one continuous sound or a series of sounds connected very, very closely. There is no gap between each word that I'm saying right now, for example. Where are the gaps? The gaps are where there are full stops and where there are commas. So if I'm going to say a first conditional, I would have a little gap to separate the two clauses, let's say, of the sentence. So the only times that you'll hear gaps between words is when in written form there would be a full stop or a comma. Otherwise, all the words are pronounced together. I'll repeat that again. Listen to this as like one connected sound. All the words are pronounced together. All the words are pronounced together. That's just one continuous string of sounds with no gap to tell you where is one word, where is the next. So this is really, really important. So this is the most important part of pronunciation, because when you're in contact, when you're listening, in this case, to another language, English, your brain is trying to pick out each individual words from this one long string of sound. I remember this perfectly when I was learning French. I remember sitting in the classroom knowing no French at all, and all the language was to me was just one continuous sound of French sounds. That's all it was. And then it was really interesting. I remember this perfectly, and I remember the visual image that I have in my head, which was as I heard a repeated sound, my brain was able to take that sound out of this long string of sounds and separate it. And what my brain did slowly was separate the words and yes, separate the words in my head and let's say put gaps where there were no gaps in the sound. It was a really interesting process. And as I learned more and more French, I was able to separate more and more words until, my brain was capable of understanding each word as separate words from one long continuous string of sounds. And you're going to be doing the same thing. Now, of course, you got much more level than I had back then in French. But there are still going to be words that you don't understand. And there are still going to be things that people say that maybe they say them in a particular way that you're not used to, and you have problems separating these sounds. This is where connected speech is really, really important. So that's the most important part. Written words have gaps between them, but spoken words and spoken language have no gaps between them unless there is a full stop in its written form or a comma in its written form. That's the only time that there are gaps. Otherwise, it's one long continuous string of sounds. So it's your job to, separate these words, individual words, from one long string of continuous sounds. So what does this imply? Well, it means that English produces three distinct pronunciation peculiarities, let's say. I'm going to be covering all three of these in today's class. So the first one is the pronunciation of the final consonant of each word. This is key in connected speech. The second part is contractions, which is a real key part of English. And the last one is weak forms of auxiliary words. So that one particular word can be pronounced in typically two different ways, depending if it's emphasized or if it's part of a sentence in which other words are stressed and it changes the pronunciation of that word. We'll come to that a little bit later. So let's look at the first one. So let me just copy and paste this. Okay, so the first part is going to be looking at the pronunciation of the final consonant. So the most important part of this is that the general rule is the last syllable of a word in English, the last syllable, the last consonant of a word in English is typically pronounced at the start of the next word. So I'm going to change this for the last consonant, really. Okay, the last consonant of a word in English is typically pronounced at the start of the next word. And again, I'm not expecting you to be able to do this. It's extremely difficult if you spend your whole life pronouncing in a particular way, but it's really important when you're listening to native speakers because this is how we speak. So let's have a look at the first example here. We've got, I want to go. Now, the way that the rhythm of English means that we don't pronounce each syllable. So these are all one word syllables. You've got three words, each of them is one syllable. But native speakers won't say, I want to go. Even if we speak quickly, we can't say like that, I want to go. It's very, very difficult to speak like this in English because it's a very consonant heavy language. So what happens is that, I'm going to say this normally and try and listen to see what happens to the T at the end of want when I say this. I want to go. I want to go. So you hear that this T is almost not pronounced at all. The reason is that it's transferred to the beginning of the next word. Now, because that's a T, it sounds like there's no T at all. You probably only hear one T, the T of to, and you don't hear the T of want. And this is exactly how native speakers would pronounce this. So we would pronounce this as I want to go. I want to go. So you see that my mouth, I'm like paused on the N, and the T is pronounced at the beginning of the next word, which in this case is to, because that also begins with T. It's basically not pronounced at all. So we wouldn't say, I want to go. Again, you can't have two T's next to each other. I want to, it's too difficult to say. So what happens in English is that this particular example disappears because it would be the last T would be transferred to the beginning of the next word, but because in this case it's a T also basically just disappears. So I want to go. So I would recommend that this is an easy one to practice. I want. Now, if you just say I want, well, we pronounce the T clearly, but if there's another word after, the T would be pronounced at the beginning of that one. So try to practice this. It would be pronounced in this way. I want to go. I want to go. So there's only one T. Next one. Listen to how I'm saying this and see which sound is moved to the next word. He lived in England. He lived in England. So even if I say this slowly, again, this is not a speed thing. It's just the way that the words are pronounced in English. He lived in England. He lived in England. So you can hear that the D gets transferred to here. This is what it sounds like. He lived in England. He lived in England. He lived in England. So the first time I teach this to people, they're almost shocked and surprised. It's like, why would you do that? How does that happen? But because of the rhythm in English, it's very normal for this to happen. This is standard English. Even, the Queen would have said this in this way. She wouldn't have said, he lived in England. He lived in England. So the D is pronounced at the beginning of in. Next one. She says all the birds are gone. So what happens here is that the S is transferred to all. She says all, she says all, zall, she says all. She says all the birds are gone. The birds are gone. So it goes to there. Zall, zar. She says all the birds are gone. So again, if you're not used to doing this, I don't expect you to do it perfectly, but I know for a fact that you will be doing this already subconsciously, which is fantastic. And again, why is this important? Not for you to pronounce it perfectly, although you will be doing a lot of this already, is that if there's something that a person says, a native speaker, and you know that it's a simple sentence, but you can't hear it, like, for example, I want to go, and you hear one. What does one mean? I want, one to go. What is one? I mean, you would understand because it's a very simple sentence, but imagine it's another word. Try and consider this. Is there a sound which is being moved to the next word that if you put back, it would make perfect sense? I want to go. I want to go. He lived in England. She says all the birds are gone. Good. Life is a series of failures punctuated by the occasional success. So this is a tricky one. So again, an easy one here is life is a series. Life is a series of zov. The S goes with of. We don't say a series of, we say a series of. Failures punctuated, failures punctuated, failures punctuated. So the S goes with the P there. Occasional success, occasional success. So the L is a bit longer there, all right? We all said so. We all said so. So sometimes I'll say a sentence like this, which is super easy, but maybe you don't expect it. And you hear it and it just sounds like a string of sounds. We all said so. We all said so. So yeah, what happens is the vowels almost disappear. The consonants are all pushed together. So it's something that's really, really important to understand here. So the apples are green. Now, two things happen in this one. The apples are green. The apples are green. So you can quite clearly hear that the S is pronounced with R. It sounds like SAR. The apples are green. The apples are green. And then what happens here? Well, we put after the and then a word that begins with typically E or A, we put an invisible Y there to connect these words. So if the words can't connect, we force them to connect by putting this soft consonant, which is a Y sound, the Y. So if you hear again, the apples, we don't say the apples, because it creates that pause, that gap, and it makes it very difficult to speak. So this is often what will happen as well. We hear a Y between certain words to force the words to connect together if they don't naturally connect. The apples are green. The apples are green. Good, I'll get rid of that. An emblem, an emblem, is, An emblem is a symbol of identification. So an emblem is a symbol of identification. This is a nonsensical sentence, but it doesn't matter. So you can see in all these sentences, the last consonant is pronounced at the beginning of the next one. And when there are not two consonants, there are two vowels in this case, we'll force a consonant in there to push them together. Good, so that's the first part. Next part. We're going to be looking at contractions. Contractions are a very key part of not only spoken English, but written English when we're looking at dialogue in fiction books, for example. So very important. Okay, so this part is kind of the introduction to this is very, very relevant to the previous part that I just explained as well about the consonants being pronounced at the beginning of the next word. Why does this happen? Well, the reason is that English is what we call a stress-based language, not a syllable-based language. So most languages are syllable-based languages where each syllable of a word is given equal length and equal, let's say, respect, equal speech time. And the rhythm follows the syllables of the words. English is not like that. It's a stress-based a stress-based language where the words that are stressed are obviously stressed and given a lot of emphasis and pronounced quite strongly, and the other words are pushed together and compressed and contracted in this case. So because it's a stress-based language, only the important words are pronounced correctly, or as you would expect them to be pronounced, and the other words get pushed together, get compressed. So this is what we're looking at. So what happens to this is that this produces contractions of typically auxiliary verbs, but you will see other things being contracted like wanna. Wanna is a classic contraction. 20, gonna, things like that. They're useful to understand, but I wouldn't recommend you use them unless you have excellent pronunciation. Otherwise, they can sound a little bit strange from non-native speakers. Okay, so, and this is something I really push my students to do as well, in that when you speak, contract everything. Well, contract everything that you can contract. All auxiliary verbs that can be contracted, you should be contracting when you speak in English. And when you write in English, typically, unless it's a WhatsApp message, a text message, or an informal email, don't contract. But when you speak, everything is contracted. So if I say, for example, I have lived here for 14 years, if I say it in an uncontracted way, it sounds a little bit strange, sounds too formal, and it sounds like I'm emphasizing the sentence. So you do want to contract all auxiliary verbs when it's possible and relevant to. So I've lived here for 14 years. I've lived here for 14 years. So I've lived here for 14 years. And again, you can hear the D becoming part of here. I've lived here, I've lived here, I've lived here. I've lived here for 14 years. Good, an easy one here. She is a teacher. Sounds strange. She's a teacher. She's a teacher. I think they will have finished by 10 p.m. Sounds strange, contracted. I think they'll have finished by 10 p.m. And even this, we would have what we call a double contraction. So listen to this and see how I say it. I think they'll have finished by 10 p.m. I think they'll have. What happens here is that it gets double contracted. We've got two auxiliary verbs that can be contracted. When we speak, they both get contracted. So have isn't pronounced as have. It becomes of. I think they'll have. I think they'll have. All of these future perfect ones will have all sound like the word love. All right. And this is really important. So sometimes when people misunderstand native speakers, it's often because of these double contractions. Again, you don't want to write this. This is something that you hear, and you will hear it in this way. So I think they'll have finished by 10 p.m. I think they'll have finished by 10 p.m. Again, if you don't want to pronounce it in this way, totally fine. I don't expect you to, but I do expect you to understand these when native speakers say them. So be very careful of these. Native speakers will always contract everything when we speak unless we want to emphasize a particular sentence. Now, most of the time, we don't want to emphasize a particular sentence, so we contract everything. Good. I do not think he would have done it. Sorry, I do not think he would have done it. Sounds very strange spoken in that way. So again, we've got a few contractions here. I don't think, again, you don't even hear the T on the end here. I don't think. We just say, I don't think so. When I say don't, I almost never pronounce the T when the sentence continues. Imagine you ask me, Adam, do you play, I don't know, Adam, do you play checkers? And I say, no, I don't. No, I don't. Just a normal, no, I don't, ends with the T, and I'll put it there. But if it's a normal sentence, the present simple and the negative, I'll say, I don't, and then the next word. I don't want to. I don't think so. I don't reckon. I don't know. I don't know. And this is where you hear the common extreme contraction of, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know is basically a slightly more extreme contraction of, I don't know. And then what happens in the sentence also is this would have. Again, we don't pronounce it as would have, we pronounce it as would have. Would have. I don't think he would have done it. I don't think he would have done it. I don't think he would have done it. So again, you wouldn't typically write it in this way, but this is exactly how it would sound when a native speaker says this. So I don't think he would have done it. So even if I say this slowly, it still gets contracted. It's just the way that English sounds. And then last one, pretty simple. He is not. We don't say he is not unless you want to emphasize, which would be very strange. He isn't. He isn't. He isn't. And often the T is removed from the end also. He isn't or he isn't. Lovely. So far, so good. Let's get on to the last one. So then we've got what we call the weak forms. Now, the weak forms are also very important, and these are, again, related to the fact that English is a stress-based language, not a syllable-based language. So the important words in a sentence, often the subjects, but not always, the verbs definitely, the nouns, some adjectives, they're all the words which have the stress in the sentence. So not all syllables are pronounced exactly the same with the same length. Only the important words, okay? So you can see that only was stressed, the important, port, which is the stressed syllable of important, only the important words are. So what happens to the other words? Well, they become what we call weak forms. Weak forms is basically a different way of pronouncing these words and others, but these are the most common, when they're not stressed. And this is really, really important to understand. So each of these words here has at least two ways of pronouncing them, depending if it's stressed, so it's considered a stressed important word in the sentence, or not, if it's just a connecting word in the sentence. So you've got and, typically it's and, but we've got an as well, like Guns and Roses or fish and chips. We don't say fish and chips, guns and roses. Guns and Roses. Doesn't sound cool, does it? It doesn't sound like a rock band if we say it in that way. So Guns and Roses, fish and chips. In fact, Guns and Roses, there is just apostrophe N. That's the way it's written. Guns and Roses, fish and chips. So and in a sentence, if it's not stressed, becomes an. If you don't want to say it like that, it's totally fine, although you probably will be saying this at least some of the time. But it's important to understand. 2, the weak form becomes t. I'm going to the cinema. I'm going to the cinema. We don't say I'm going to the cinema. I'm going to the cinema. It's strange. I'm going to the cinema. To the. I'm going to the cinema. Can becomes can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. That's stressed, so it's pronounced can. But if we look in this first example here, we don't say I can wait for you. We say I can wait for you. I can wait for you. So it becomes can. I can wait for you. Even I isn't pronounced I, it's pronounced ah. I can, I can, I can wait for you. I can wait for you. All native speakers would say it in this way. Have, we've seen that it's often pronounced have. Yes, I have. But I would have done it if I'd known. Of, have when it's not stressed becomes of. Have or mostly of. Of is of or of as well. Okay. The ace of spades, the ace of spades, the ace of spades, the ace of spades. For or th. What are you going for? That could be a sentence. And I made it for you. I made it for you, for example. I made it for you. No, I made it for you. For you, for you. Good. From or from. You or yeah. What do you want? What do you want? So what, the T almost disappears. What do you want? What do you want? So it's really, really important. And these are the most common, but there are many, many more. Short, basically they're short. They're always one syllable words. One syllable words tend to be connecting words, some subjects that aren't stressed. That's basically it. Try and hear them. It's what all native speakers do. Again, if you don't want to do this, not important, but I recommend you certainly practice this and try and listen to it when native speakers are saying it so that you can understand it and practice listening for it. And then we've got the more extreme ones like because, which is often pronounced cause, wanna from want to, gonna from going to. It's okay for native speakers to say these, but if you're not a native speaker, it sounds a little bit strange. It sounds a little bit strange. This is something which tends to be reserved mostly for native speakers. It's just the cruel reality of being a non-native speaker. There are certain things that if you say them, sounds a little bit strange. Something that native speakers do in all languages. And if non-native speakers say them, it sounds a bit strange. So let's have a look at some examples then and see what happens when we put these basic words inside a sentence, how are they pronounced? So we saw this before. We don't say, I can wait for you. I can wait for you sounds very strange. I can. So I can tends to be pronounced I can. I can wait for you. I can wait for you. I can wait for you. So this is a sentence which contains all of the elements that we've spoken about. I can wait for you. Well, it doesn't contain a contraction, but that's not important. So the T almost disappears. I can wait for you. I can wait for you. Yeah, the T before a hard consonant tends to disappear. So I can wait for you. I can wait for you. And for isn't for, it's for. I can wait for you. Next one. This is a common doubt that my students have. Can't. Okay? Can't. So it's typically pronounced can't. I can't wait for you. I can't wait for you. Now, what happens is that this T almost disappears. I can't wait for you. I certainly don't say it when I say it. If I say a basic sentence like, no, I can't, full stop, I clearly pronounce the T. In a sentence with the negative of can, it's pronounced can. Just like you've got a car that you drive, put an N on the end, and you've got the pronunciation of this, can, in a sentence. I can't wait for you. I can't wait for you. What's also important, can't is the stressed word in this sentence. It's the most important word in the sentence because you want to show the negative. That's really important because it's a negative sentence. So this word is stressed. So I can't wait for you. What happens in this one? I is stress, I can wait for you, but can isn't. We just pronounce it as can, and that's it. I can wait for you. I can wait for you. I can't wait for you. I can, I can't. I can, I can't. That's basically the rule. Do you know? Do you know? So you can hear that you becomes a weak form. It becomes yeah. Again, I don't recommend you really say this, but most native speakers are going to say it in this way. And do and you almost get contracted to become one word. Do you know? This is very, very common when you're having an informal conversation. and somebody says the classic sentence, do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Comes, do you know? Do you know? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? What I mean from what I mean. She can swim faster than I can. She can swim faster than I can. So it's an interesting one because this first can is pronounced can. She can swim faster. What happens though? Than I can. This becomes can. We need to clearly show that we're saying can. So even in one sentence, the same word can be pronounced in two different ways. She can swim faster than I can. She can swim faster than I can. Than becomes than I can, than I can. She can swim faster than I can. I'm from Nottingham, England. I'm from. This sounds like am. Sounds like just the auxiliary verb am. I'm from. We don't typically say from. I'm from Nottingham, England. Can say it like that. Most native speakers wouldn't, particularly if you're from Nottingham, like I am. I'm from Nottingham, England. Do you like fish and chips? Do you like? So again, we got that one that we saw before. Do you like fish and chips? So as you know well, and particularly in fish and chips, is never pronounced fish and chips. Fish and chips. Guns N' Roses, fish and chips. Do you like fish and chips? Good. You should have said. You should have said. So again, it's not you should have said, because that sounds like I'm accusing you, because I'm emphasizing. You should have said. You should have said. I'll go to the shop. I'll go to the shop. So I'll becomes I'll go. Go is stress, so we need to pronounce that correctly. To the is pronounced to the. Sorry. A lot of talking. I'll go to the shop. 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 You just put it all together like that. I'll go to the shop. I'll go to the shop. From me to you. From me to you. So me and you is not pronounced as y here. Why? Because the important words here are me, you. They're the important words. They're the words that are stressed. From becomes weak. Sorry, from becomes weak, so it's pronounced from. To becomes weak. To. From me to you. From me to you. From me to you. And that, my friends, is all. So that's basically the most important parts of connected speech. And I definitely recommend you watch it again, watch those 3 different parts. Try and repeat the sentences as I say them, but don't worry about trying to pronounce them in that way in every sentence that you say. The only part of practicing saying them is to try and reprogram the brain to be able to hear them correctly when native speakers say these sentences, say these things, say the sentences in the way that we do. So very, very important. Practice them again, say them out loud to reprogram the brain to be able to listen to them when we say them. And in that way, it will increase the probability that your listening skills will just improve radically, just from not mishearing things that you already know. Because you've seen all these sentences, very, very basic sentences, but if you mishear one particular word, the whole sentence is gone. So have a listen again, and I'll see you in the next class. Take care.